The 54th Regiment was a regiment brought together to fight in the Civil War. 1,007 black men were enlisted with 37 white officers, and 1,000 of these men were volunteers. The 54th Regiment was sponsored by a man named John Andrew, the wartime governor of Massachusetts. He had always been for the enlistments of African American men in regiments raised for federal service. He had believed that they had something to fight for, especially after the issuing of the Emancipation Proclamation. He believed that freedom would be of little value to the American black man if he didn't fight for it himself. As soon as this was approved, the news was delivered to Shaw. Many slaves who joined the regiment did it to escape their owners. Under the sponsorship of the New England Anti-Slavery Forces, an act had passed in Congress that said, "All officers or persons in the military or naval service of the United States are prohibited from employing any of the forces under their respective commands for the purpose of returning fugitives from service or labor, who may have escaped from any person to whom such service or labor is claimed to be due, and any officer who shall be found guilty by a court-martial of violating this article shall be dismissed from the service." George L. Stearns, a Secret Six abolitionist, led the nationwide recruitment for the 54th Regiment. He developed most of this regiment in the spring of 1863 through building a network of well-known African Americans who did most of it through speaking and signing the men up and putting them on trains for Boston. Most of these black volunteers were between the ages of 18 and 23 years old. A white businessman named James W. Grace opened a recruiting office. He was openly insulted and would get harassed on the streets. He was known as the captain of the Negro Company. Even his son was made fun of in school for his dad raising a company of black men to fight whites. Governor Andrew and Colonel Shaw had hoped that this regiment would not only be an excellent regiment, but a model regiment that would overcome the national prejudice against colored troops. The result was a regiment of healthy, sturdy, eager black warriors, one of the best of the Union Army regardless of color. Although the blacks were promised fair payment, the federal government refused to pay the blacks and whites equally. Since the war began, there had been widespread prejudice in the ranks of federal regiment against the enlistment of black men. Whites were paid $13 per month, not including their clothing, and blacks were only paid $7 per month, including their clothing. Lincoln had thought that unequal pay was a reasonable concession to the white troops who preferred that the black troops not serve at all. No matter what service the black soldier might render, no matter how nobly he might equate himself, he must carry with him the degradation of not being considered a man but a thing, said by Sergeant George E. Stevens. By September and October of 1865, the 54th Regiment received their full pay after much fighting to receive it. Soldiers were overjoyed to be able to send money home to their families in need. African American men had to go through a different kind of fight from most other white men. They weren't treated with the same respect, and the rules of war were completely neglected. In Winchester, the men were forced to retreat along the main street of the town. They were harassed all the way through by Confederate soldiers, as well as being shot at by civilians who hid in their homes, shooting from windows and doorways. A lot of times, these African American men were taken as prisoners. The prisoners of war faced severe fate at the hands of the rebels. Southern troops would sometimes massacre the black prisoners. The Confederates would threaten to return them back to slavery or try them as war criminals. The men of the 54th knew this would happen if they were captured and expected to be hanged or shot as well. These ways of the Confederate soldiers eventually had to change when Lincoln threatened to shoot a rebel prisoner for every African American prisoner executed. Although it changed for the most part, during every battle black men would go MIA, some killed in battle, some taken as prisoner. On September 22, 1862, Lincoln presented the Emancipation Proclamation, which announced that on January 1st, all slaves in rebellion against the Union would be free. This act makes it clear that the lives of our heroes have not been sacrificed in vain. It makes the victory of our defeats, our hearts are healed, the health of the nation is repaired, said by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Leaders of the South were extremely unhappy about this and decided to completely disregard all rules of war once again. General Shaw felt that the Emancipation Proclamation was the right thing to do on Lincoln's part, but recognized that as a measure taken before the end of war had evil consequences that would outbalance the good. General Shaw expressed to his wife how hopeful he was for his men in a letter that he wrote to her. Just remember our own doubts and fears and other people's sneering and pitying remarks when we began last winter, and then look at the perfect triumph of last Thursday. We have gone quietly along forming the regiment and at last left Boston amidst a greater enthusiasm than has been since seen the first 3 months troops left for the war. General Hunter of the 54th Regiment was given leeway by Lincoln in where the arming of blacks was concerned. Hunter in his recruitment allowed for his men to take blacks right from their work in the cotton field, giving these men no time to say goodbye to their families and loved ones. Hunter later led a raid through a town called Darien in Georgia, where he ordered the men to destroy homes, shops, churches, hospitals, and more, as well as steal from the people. Shaw was horrified by this and expressed that the men only plundered and destroyed by their commanding officer Hunter's orders. Lincoln grew tired of Hunter's actions and removed him. General Shaw and his regiment were very strong and worked greatly together. Shaw stuck beside them and defended them to the death. He said that he wanted his men to fight in a good fight alongside with white troops one day. He had died in battle with his men. His body was found in a trench with those of his privates who had died as well and covered. General Strong, who fought with the regiment, wrote in his last dying words, "The 54th did well and nobly. Only the fall of Colonel Shaw prevented them from entering the fort. They moved up as gallantly as any troops could, and with their enthusiasm they deserved a better fate." Blacks came together from all over in this regiment and proudly fought not only to save the Union but to destroy slavery and earn their equality and right to citizenship. Many died due to battle wounds, disease, and cruel ways from being captured by the enemy and deserve remembrance for their heroic actions.